Today's episode is brought to you by In My Bag Apparel and Customs. In My Bag is a brand that collaborates with talented artists from across the country to bring some unique and exclusive concepts to life at a reasonable price. For $15 off your first purchase, visit whatnot.com/invite/inmy_bag 2023. That's whatnot.com/invite/inmy_bag 2023 for $15 off your first purchase. And make sure to check them out on Instagram as well at inmy_bag 2023. Did you know the average person can fall asleep within 7 minutes? I don't know who you are, but I hate y'all. Let's get into it. All right, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Playbook Podcast. I'm Prescott Kelly. Today is Thursday, February 20th. Glad to have you back with us. This is an impromptu episode. I took some time off, man. I've been at my job now for a little over a year. I haven't taken one day off besides, just my scheduled days off. There's no football. I'm just here to chop it up with you guys. We are working on another promotional, not really promotional, but I'm trying to help somebody out, just doing the Lord's work on trying to help somebody else build their empire, and we're working on some promotional stuff. But regardless, welcome back to the Playbook Podcast. I'm Prescott Kelly. You can find the audio version wherever you get your podcasts, wherever the audio ones. Here we like, share, subscribe, smash the 5-star reviews. Don't be a hater. We don't appreciate haters in this space. So the first thing we want to get to is, before we actually get into the Bengals, because the Bengals are continuing to bangle, and their plans are to give Tee Higgins another franchise tag. But before we do anything else, we're just going to go into that. I feel like I don't understand why the Bengals continue to do this every single year, where it's a salary cap, right? It's a salary cap sport. It is something where you shouldn't have to be handcuffed by what you're paying players. We also understand that the salary cap is also, to a degree, we use the word that it's a myth far too often, but it's not. Like, it's not a myth. It still happens. It's still a thing that you have to account for, but it can be manipulated. And the Rams are a perfect example of it. Signing bonuses, draft, they continuously keep this thing going and moving. The Saints haven't been able to do that. And the Bengals, to get back on point with them, is that it's the same for everybody. The salary cap is the same for everybody. Now, the numbers may not always be disclosed as early as you want to be able to make the moves that you think that you can do. But Tee Higgins has been on your board for a bit. He's been on everybody's board for a bit. But a couple years ago, the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. And I said, this is not going to last long, because you can't pay Burrow, you can't pay Chase, and you can't pay Higgins, and you can't pay Mixon, because Mixon was still on the roster at that point in time. Now, Mixon's already gone. Okay, he's in Houston. So you think, oh, we got extra money now. Not necessarily. On top of the fact that all these guys, everybody has an ego. In the world of sports, we like to think that our favorite player doesn't have the ego, that it's always team first, that it's always the winning matters, which is complete bullshit. And it's weird that at this point in time, in 2025, where I'm 40 years old now, and I still have to have the conversations with other grown adults, that the ego still matters. The ego is still part of the equation. So Tee Higgins, by no accounts, is Jamar Chase, right? I think that we can all understand that he's not the same level talent that he is. But what has Tee Higgins been built up to over these last few years? He could be a number one on multiple teams. Maybe not with Cincinnati, but he could be a number one wide receiver on half the league. That's what he's been hearing because either A, you are saying it, or you're repeating what your favorite NFL analyst is saying and hijacking that take as yours, but the traction's still there. The thing is, I don't think that Tee Higgins is a true number one wide receiver. And I've been on this pedestal for a while. We use the term number one wide receiver way too loosely. Almost basically to the same extent that we do as generational talent with the NBA. Is number one wide receiver doesn't mean much if your wide receiving core is Tennessee, right? Like Tee Higgins would obviously be the number one wide receiver on Tennessee, but he's not the number one wide receiver in Minnesota. He's not the number one wide receiver in Cincinnati. You could argue he wouldn't be the number one wide receiver in Miami. We use the term number one wide receiver way too loosely, give it way too much cred. He is a very talented wide receiver, and he benefits from having Ja'Marr Chase opposite him. So the long and short of most of what this is about is he's been gassed up to being a number one wide receiver because the media tells you that he is. And in certain markets, he would be. But if he didn't have Ja'Marr Chase opposite him, would he attract that kind of money? And the answer to that riddle for me personally is no, he wouldn't. But they're looking at franchising him again. And this whole thing is going to blow up. I said this a number of years ago, right after they went to the Super Bowl. You can't keep them all together. You can't keep, especially because of how cheap the Bengals have typically been. And that goes back to the whole, it's a salary cap sport. Like you don't get extra money for not using the money that is allocated from the league, right? The NBA has kind of dabbled in this with like, you can go over the luxury tax, go over it again, but now they have these second aprons and all this other, like all this other bullshit. But you have the money allocated to you. Spend it. Use it. You're not being penalized for paying players under a cap that you are allowed to pay them. The Saints are now being penalized because they made just atrocious moves. And the fact that people were defending, the fact that folks were defending Taysom Hill when he is reportedly getting cut from the Saints is wild to me. He's not a quarterback. He's not a running back. He's not a tight end. He's not a wide receiver. He's nothing. He's a football player, but by no metrics really gives you any real value. Deebo Samuel, if you're asking me, just if we're doing that, I'd rather have Deebo Samuel than Taysom Hill, but that's an argument for another day. But it doesn't make any sense to me as to why the Bengals have been so restrictive with their money when you're not being penalized for not paying the players that you're given the money to pay them for. It doesn't make any sense to me. But so the plan is Cincinnati is going to re-tag him again, which apparently is going to be, I think, $26 million. For Justin Jefferson's making, I think, $38 million and 36. I think he's making 36 or 38. Ja'Marr Chase wants 36 or 38. He wants 40, but they're going to want to try to dwindle that down. But for the Bengals to be able to move on from Tee Higgins, somebody's going to have to match that 26 cap hit, or not cap hit, but that $26 million franchise tag, and give them 2 first-round picks for it. So what's the plan then, Cincinnati? You have been doing this incorrectly for years now. The one thing that I've always said is like, when it comes to the NFL specifically, the salary cap continues to go up. You can only benefit by signing these players early. Maybe you whiff, right? Maybe you're doing this too early and you're paying them too early. But if the salary cap is continuing to go up, the worse your move looks year by year. Cincinnati wants to keep pushing this down the road, not want to pay anybody, and then pay them top tier money down the line if they even do that, because Ja'Marr Chase is not guaranteed this contract. What he wants, he's not guaranteed it. Right? He doesn't have to be, and he can just leave. And this is kind of the same thing with T. Higgins is if you would have paid him what he wanted or what you thought he was worth last year, same thing with Jamar Chase, you wouldn't be doing this now. And it would be looked at as a relatively frugal is not the right word because when you're throwing this much money around, it's not frugal by any stretch of the imagination. But at least it looks better if the salary cap continues to go up. But if you're supposed to you're going to pay him $26 million a year this year when you franchise him. If somebody's willing to pay you 2 firsts, that's my understanding, is that if somebody's willing to pay you 2 firsts, they can have him. So what's the market for T. Higgins then? Is it 2 first-round draft picks? I don't know. But the thing is, you guys clearly have not been able to communicate to get a long-term deal done, which at this point in time would suggest to me that T doesn't want to be there anyways. So if you can't find a suitor for him, he may not have that no trade clause or whatever, but y'all better find somebody who is willing to do that, because if you do him dirty again, y'all are in some big old trouble. It's mostly for a long-term thing because Cincinnati, again, has been looked at as a cheap franchise who doesn't want to pay players. They open up the pocketbook for Jamar Chase. Or not, I'm sorry, not Jamar Chase, but for Joe Burrow. So they provided this false sense of security where, oh, well, now they're opening the pocketbooks. Maybe we want to go there, but we've seen the Trey Hendricks and Jamar Chase and now T. Higgins again. Are there teams who are willing to pay 2 first-rounders for him, though? The answer to that, I don't know. We have seen enough teams give up way too much. The NFL, honestly, the NFL trade valuation makes no sense to me. I have seen Super Bowl MVPs get traded, and then I've seen quarterbacks who were absolute cheeks get multi-year record-setting deals just because of the quarterback. So I have no idea what the actual market is for him, to be completely honest. But if we're just taking a step back, is do you think that T. Higgins is worth 2 first-round picks? There might be a couple teams that would suggest that he is. Maybe. But Cincinnati has been they've been so cheap where, and that's not even the right way to do that. I personally would not trade 2 first-rounders for T. Higgins, mostly because I think that the wide receiving group right now is so talented that you can get similar talent, or you get similar stats from basically anybody as long as your position, your quarterback, your offensive line, everything, as long as your circumstance is fine, you can get relatively the exact same production as you could if T. Higgins was your number 1 wide receiver, or even Calvin Ridley when he went to the Jaguars. The wide receiving core is so talented where you shouldn't have to give up 2 first-rounders for T. Higgins, because I don't think that he's worth that. But now you're put in the position of what? You're just going to pay him $26 million a year and then lose him completely, because you can only use the tag 2 times in a row. So now what you're going to do is you're going to pay him $26 million a year. He's pissed, which means you're probably not getting you're not getting the best out of him anyways. You probably should have traded him if your intention was to not give him a long-term deal. Jamar Chase, you guys haven't signed him yet either. He wants 40 mil. And I'm not saying that Jamar Chase isn't good, because I know that he is. He's on that same kind of playing field as Justin Jefferson. But if I'm using your guys' math against you, having a top 5 wide receiver, having a top 2, 3, 4 wide receiver, what does that really get you nowadays? Nothing. Same thing as like paying these quarterbacks this much money. There's only 2, 3 guys who move the needle, and let's be serious. One guy in Mahomes is the dude, and he's got 3 of them. Then there was Brady, and then there was Jalen Hurts with the best offensive line, best defensive line, and a stacked roster. Unless you're coordinating your roster that way, you have no chance anyways. And you don't have a GOAT conversation quarterback at all either. It's like, and I shouldn't say about Joe Burrow, I'm not trying to diminish what he is because I know he's incredibly talented. But again, using your logic against you, if he was that good, why did you get up to such a slow start? You shouldn't need the defense because like you can pick your argument of why somebody's good or why they're terrible based on the outcome. And that's largely what sports has been dumbed down to is did you win? You're good. If you didn't, you're bad. Like at the beginning of the season, nobody was saying that Joe Burrow should be in the MVP conversation. But at the end of the season, we saw them starting to win games. And so, well, even though they didn't make the playoffs, Joe Burrow, he's that dude. Okay, fine. And I made the argument basically 13 years ago, right before the Colts got Andrew Luck. Peyton Manning should have won MVP because they went from like 13-3 to 1-15 with Curtis Painter. If you don't tell me that that's not valuable, I don't know what is. But apparently we don't do the math that way though. Anyway, my biggest thing is the Bengals are still once again fumbling everything that has to do with their offseason. They had one magical run. They made it to a Super Bowl, and I told you guys, this is not the team. It's not going to be. It was a 1-year flash in the pan. And what are we doing now, just a few years later? Jamar Chase is in flux. Tee Higgins is in flux. The defense is absolute cheeks. It's much harder to win the NFL than you think it is. These dynasties, we don't get them very often, but when we do, we think it's easy to replicate just because Brady ran through things for 2 decades, and now Mahomes has ran through one for another. The Niners were kind of that way in the 80s. You know, Steelers and the Cowboys. Like we've had a number of what you can debate, and some people can even debate what is a dynasty and what's not, and that's fine. But we've had very few representations of it. And just to think that because you had Joe Burrow, who you like, and Jamar Chase, who you like, and offense apparently now wins championships and defense doesn't, there's a lot of evidence that says that you're wrong on all accounts. And the Bengals, to me, they are going to be in a world of trouble for the next few years. Let's move along. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of days about if the Rams should move on from Matt Stafford, which I honestly didn't even see coming until like 2 days ago. I didn't think it was on the table. I didn't feel like it was something they would even entertain because he's 30, what is he, 36, 37 years old. But apparently he wants a new deal. And if that's the case, you absolutely trade Matt Stafford. Like you have to. If he wants one of these deals that I have been, again, this is coming from the lens of me. There are certain people who I know are going to defend Matt Stafford. They're going to be like, well, he was in Detroit forever and they were bad. And then he goes to the Rams and he went Super Bowl his first year. And now they got Puka Nacua. And now they got Kyron Williams and they're awesome. Like, why? And their defense is awesome. Why wouldn't they just pay him and keep him? It's because he's 36 and 37 years old. That's the reason why you don't do it. You don't need to be in a position like you were with Pittsburgh when you had Ben Roethlisberger. You don't need to be in a position where you were with Matt Ryan. You don't have to be the Russell Wilsons of the world. Stop paying these guys too much, too long in their career, and paying them for previous successes. I think what was a good thing about what LA did is LA's done things that other teams haven't done. We talked about this a little bit earlier where they weren't afraid to pull the trigger to trade for Jalen Ramsey. They weren't afraid to pull the trigger for Matt Stafford because there is a win now mode, right? And this is why I always defend these guys in the front offices that this is incredibly difficult to do. Winning championships is hard. Sustaining excellence is difficult. Just because you did it 1 year doesn't mean you can replicate it. Dan Campbell has been on the exact, and as much as I give Dan Campbell for what he's done as far as the antics off the field, like not really antics, but the way the kneecap body and things, I'm still not a huge Dan Campbell fan, but I understand what he's built and I can appreciate it. And at that point in time, I just have to kind of eat crow at that point and say, the dudes at least play for you. I get it. But it's also like the Rams are in this position where they leaned really hard into, we think we got the right squad. We're going to trade assets for proven players, which is something that I believe in. And if you're going to look at it from that angle, you're obviously not going to be able to trade Matt Stafford for another generational player. For player, that's not going to happen. But you might be able to get a good enough draft pick. And then what if you hit? Because the Rams have drafted really well over the past 3 or 4 years. They've been awesome. They've gotten great running backs and wide receivers, and the defensive line is crazy, and they have smacked it as far as what they've done through the draft. And maybe that's what they are looking for, is we can trade him because we realize our window with Matt Stafford at our quarterback is limited. And that's the way that you should think about it. Like Tom Brady, I've said this timeless times, LeBron James and Tom Brady have just ruined the math on what we think is an acceptable time period of greatness. You're chasing the anomaly instead of just trying to build the best football team. And with how much money is being thrown around now, I do think that more teams are. I was ahead of this 3 years ago, and all I did was just mimic Bill Belichick. Hey, my team is trash. I'm going to go from tiny guys to big guys. I'm going to bully you up front. I'm going to win 9 games ugly. And they did that with Cam Newton at quarterback, who y'all hate. Did it equate to anything? No, but I was kind of on board. I was like, hey, everyone's going small. Run the ball more. Running backs are going to make a resurgence. And they did. And it's almost kind of the same thing with the NFL kind of taking, what they're going to do is kind of take back control of, we don't have to pay for your previous successes. Right? We've seen this multiple times with all of the quarterbacks I just laid out. Maybe they're like, hey, let's get ahead of this before things get bad. We don't have to extend him for another 30, 40, $50 million a year contract. What's the point of that? The Lions are here, the Eagles are here, the Bears, we think, at least I do, think are going to be better than what they were last year. There's no reason to pay Matthew Stafford that much more money. So trade him. Now, the team that he's been most equated to is the Giants. And I don't know what the compensation is supposed to be for Matt Stafford. The Giants currently, I think, hold the 3 spot. If what they're supposed to give up is the number 3 overall pick for Matt Stafford, if the Giants do that, they have to be relegated down to like high school peewee football. Like I like Matt Stafford just as much as anybody who else really enjoys watching him play football. But if you think that Matt Stafford is worth the number 3 overall pick of this year's draft, that's ridiculous. And you can't do that, man. You just can't be a part of that. Trading Matt Stafford to me is not the problem. It's the compensation and where he goes. And the fact that he's been linked to the Giants, there hasn't been a whole lot that's been leaked. So it really depends on what you're getting back. If you're getting back late round picks, if you're swapping players, all right, we can entertain the idea of it. But there's no way that you're giving up the number 3 overall pick for Matt Stafford. Again, maybe that's what they want to do. I don't know. Oh, we got to go. Something just happened. Talk to you guys later. You guys know the drill. Stay blessed. Stay blessed. All right.